G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jarrad Starts, and today I'm bringing you something a little different. It's an interview that I recently did on Property Investory with Tyrone Shum, a great podcast that I listened to. And in this, he helps take me back and reflect on my property investing journey so far, my first few deals, my mindset along the way. Hopefully there's some really great takeaways in there for everyone. And in this one, we cover how I made $85,000 in 4 months on my first property deal, get stuck into all the nitty-gritty on it. So it should be a good one. Let's go inside.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management specialists servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here is your host, Jarrad Starts.
A property manager can make a massive difference as to preventing stress and improving your returns and making the whole experience good. And I think it's actually the biggest difference that has people go from one property to many properties.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategies. I'm Tyrone Shum, and in this episode, we're talking to the Managing Director of Investors Edge Real Estate, Jarrad Starts. He has found success from the start of his property investment journey, and will share how he made an $85,000 profit from his first deal, as well as hear about how a good property manager experience changed his world outlook. Marn has been building up Investors Edge Real Estate since 2008, and now he and his team are smashing the property game in Perth.
We're a Perth-based property management and investment agency, and we're looking after about 850 properties across the whole of Perth. So we're in 200-odd suburbs, and I've got a really great team of 15 staff that allows me to focus on selling properties for our clients. So I don't have any sort of day-to-day involvement in the property management side, but I obviously oversee it and make sure we're delivering a high level of service. And when our clients decide to sell, I more discuss strategy and whether it's the right time. I spend half my time talking clients out of selling because, I really make sure they've got a good reason to. And if they've got a sound investment and all the fundamentals are looking good and it's heading the right direction, why would you get out when the Perth market's got some very good years ahead?
If the Perth property market is expected to have some good years ahead, why do investors want to sell their properties?
I guess in Perth, many investors have been through a pretty rough time over the last 4 or 5 years. So they haven't seen the growth up until recently, and they had their rental prices drop by a fair bit too, so they weren't getting the ongoing rental returns that they used to be. Thankfully, rental prices are now back at where they were 4 years ago, so we just hit the mark this month at $480 per week average median, and they're quite scarred from going through that roller coaster of having the market dip. So as soon as it gets back to a price where they're above where they previously were at, many of them just think, okay, now's my point to move on, but they're not used to thinking longer term. You see it time and time again that investors get out when the market's about to boom. So the reasons are different, and if they're going to sell and then buy again in the same market, or they want to upgrade their home, then that's a really great reason to, I think. If they've had an underperforming asset and it's likely to not turn around and do good things over the next 10 years, then I think that's a good reason to potentially sell now when they can. When a market's soft, it's hard to sell a property that's on a busy road or, in the direct flight path or has some big negatives to it. And those negatives might have affected the growth and rentability during the softer times.
As well as guiding his clients in the right direction, Marn also spends his time producing a podcast.
I also have a podcast, Perth Property Insider, and that keeps me busy. Love putting episodes together. And as you'd know from running a podcast, it's I use it to, get really great guests on that I want to learn from, as well as, all my listeners. So I have a lot of fun doing that. And I've kind of set things up to have a really great work-life balance. So I take Fridays off to spend with my 3-year-old daughter. And, we go to gymnastics and have daddy-daughter day, we call it. So it's really great to be able to choose where I spend my time now. And it's not all about making money or working. So
for Marn, quality time with his family is important and is how he chooses to start his day.
I guess I get up and spend the mornings with my daughter. So we go for a walk around the block with the dog. She walks the dog and I make sure they both don't run off the path. We go to the playground, go to the cafe, and I usually get into work at about 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I just cherish that time again. And then Fridays we spend together. On the weekends, it's been lots of family. I tend to do 2 or 3 hours of home opens on a Saturday and condense that together. And I enjoy the break up because she still sleeps during the day from 12 o'clock till 3. Not looking forward to when those naps stop, Tyrone. That's our time at the moment, so we're hanging on to it and trying to keep the routine. But then we go out for breakfast on a Sunday usually, and we used to travel a lot. So in her first year of being alive, we went to Bali a few times and did a lot of down south trips and stuff. But obviously that was a lot harder with COVID. So now that things are opening up again, we've got a trip booked to go to New Zealand in end of May. So my dad's family's from there, and they've never met Lexi, our daughter, or my wife. So I think it's going to be a really great, meaningful trip for us to go and reconnect with family that they've never met. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Although Marn's dad is from New Zealand, that is not where he grew up.
So my dad was over on a holiday and met my mum on Rottnest Island, and then he never went back. So they started a family here, and we're in a working class suburb of Greenwood, which is in Perth, Western Australia. And my dad, he had his own business as a civil engineer. And I just remember him working crazy hours, and he definitely loved what he did. And he was trying to get ahead, and I can see how he was trying to do all of that for the family. But the impression and what I was left with, that he wasn't around much. And that's why I'm trying to spend so much time with my daughter and to, have her feel my presence. So that's been a really big inspiration. But I know he was trying to do it for the family, but it also affected us all because he wasn't there.
Marn's upbringing is what initially fueled him to live a life like he does now.
My parents did seem to struggle with money as well, and didn't seem to be very good at saving things. And, a lot of that burning desire that I now have sort of comes from those experiences where, I'd be at school and I've got a Vegemite sandwich and an apple, and my friends can buy lunch every day at the canteen. Simple things, but, when you're 6 or 7 years old, it sticks with you. So I went to a public primary school and high school in Greenwood, so my whole world was in Greenwood. And for the first 11 years, I never really enjoyed school much, and I'd get distracted by trying to impress girls and clowning around with my friends. And, school wasn't really for me, even though I had, a reasonable aptitude for it, but just never really found my groove. So in year 11, I was told that my grades weren't good enough to do tertiary entrance exams, and I had to take that report card home to my parents. And my parents didn't really know how bad things were going. And my dad lost his mind and was kind of like, well, I work hard and send you to school and expects me to work hard. And so he marched me down to the school and demanded that they put me in the top subjects to do, all of the higher qualifying professions. So I felt an immense pressure at that time to perform, and the school agreed and on the proviso that if I got a B grades or better at the end of the first term, they would allow me to stay in those subjects. It was pretty daunting because I hadn't done the work and got the grades to, that point. And I ended up sort of forcing myself to focus and study for 4 to 5 hours each night. And I learned like the benefit of the hard work and that it was possible, to turn it around.
As well as seeing the reward of his hard work, Marn found motivation another way.
I started to get a real buzz from beating all the smart, nerdy kids. So I just found the competition in it, and they were like shocked that who's this guy, that's been the back of the class clown for 11 years is now beating us at getting the top grades in the class. So that really fueled me on and gave me the motivation at that time, because I still wasn't really enjoying the subjects or anything. So I actually went on to receive Dux of the School, which so in an 18-month turnaround was like, they said it was the biggest turnaround the school had ever seen when they were giving me the award. So that was a pretty proud moment, yeah.
His dad was also very proud of the way that he turned his grades around.
He was exceptionally proud, and, but I was still sort of really trying to prove myself to them. And a lot of the things I did probably for the next 10 years was out of that trying to gain approval of their acceptance and for them to be proud of me. So it took me quite a while to get out of that pattern, to be honest, Tyrone, and lots of personal development.
After receiving Dux of the School, Marn had the freedom to choose any university course he desired.
I had the grades to get into pretty much any course that I could have gone and done, been a doctor or been a dentist, been an accountant. They were kind of all the things that my parents wanted me to be. And with my dad being an engineer, I kind of didn't choose my course by what I necessarily loved or wanted to do. I just did the process of elimination. So I was like, I can't handle the sight of blood, so I won't be a doctor. I don't want to look in people's mouths all day, so forget the dentistry. I don't like, I can't imagine numbers that being an accountant full-time. That's just too boring for me. So I landed on engineering, not because it was my absolute love, but because I had the grades for it. I kind of wanted to make use of the grades, and it was the thing that I liked the most of everything. So, and I think there was a bit of that, me trying to prove myself and following my dad's footsteps of him being an engineer too. So for want of knowing what else to do, that's what I did.
Despite him not having an absolute love for engineering, people seem to love Marn as an engineer.
I ended up doing electrical engineering, and once I graduated, I went and did a grad program with our sort of main utility power supplier here in Perth, and that was a fabulous experience because they transferred you around every 6 months to the different business sectors, and we were in a boom time then, so the level of projects that we got to work on were just massive because they didn't have anyone else to do the work. So I was going in as a graduate and managing, multi-million-dollar projects and having a great time, and ended up being very successful and awarded during that period too. So I could have stayed in engineering, and I had a different way of going about things. So like whenever I ran a project, I used to get everyone together and connect at for a big lunch and get them all on the same page. And when I was designing stuff, I'd go and chat to the guys that are actually in the field that would have to install it and get their input. And then I'd go chat to the senior engineer, the old grey guy, and get his input on, how this should be designed. And then I'd speak to the commissioning people. I basically just went and cheated my way through a project. But in the real world, that's how you create something that people want.
This management style worked great for Marn because why would you change something when it's working?
Well, that's what taught me a lot, and that sort of pattern has stayed with me because when it came to then the jobs being issued, the site guys taking one look at it decided to prioritise my job over everyone else's because it was the way that they wanted it to be. The senior engineers were like, Jarrad, this design's the best thing we've ever seen. And yes, it was because it was inspired by you. So it was a recipe for the fast track. And then one of my moments before I ended up leaving engineering, I pulled off this massive project, and the CEO came up to my lunch because I pulled the project in so far under cost. They said, Jarrad, you can organise a big soiree, you can spend what you want. I invited everyone from the project. We were down at the Indiana Tea House overlooking the ocean. I had, custom pens created, thanking them for working on that project. And the CEO was like, this is the best run project, the best under budget, the best, event that we've ever had. And so that was my departing moment.
Marn was on a career high after this project, so he had mixed feelings about leaving the engineering field.
I didn't close the door straight away to it, but I wanted to go, and I was doing pretty well in property, and I'd sort of made more in one deal than I'd probably made 2 or 3 times the annual salary. So I thought, if I go and focus on property full time, and what could I do with all my time spent on property?
Coming up after the break, we hear about how Jarrad Marn found an interest in property.
I was given the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I know many people had as their turning point.
He shares the unusual story of how he bought his first property.
One of the sellers called us, and they'd already left the house, and they were like, "We've already moved interstate. What will you pay us for it?"
He'll detail one of his worst experiences with a tenant.
I could tell they should never have even been approved in the first place.
And that's next. I'm Tyrone Shum, and you're listening to Property Investory. Hey there. Over the years, I've built up a portfolio of properties, and it's been great to see capital growth. But the challenge I face is the passive income has been quite poor, providing a net return of 3 to 4% per annum. I'd have to buy at least 10 properties or more to generate $100,000 per year. Now, if I had the cash to buy these outright, which I didn't, then I need the help of banks, and as they wouldn't lend me more, I was stuck. This is when I start looking into alternative investments where I could use my equity and cash to generate 25 to 30% per annum returns and fast track my passive income goal. In a short space of 2 years, I've been able to achieve this goal and have tripled my passive income instead. Now, if you want to learn more on how I did this, SMS me your name and email address on 04 88 88 31 32, and I'll send you a free report explaining how I did it. At only 16 years old, Marn took an interest in property, and while immersing himself in information, he fell down a rabbit hole.
I was given the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I know many people had as their turning point, but I got it when I was 16, and it did change my whole thinking on what was possible, and I tried to follow Rich Dad's advice instead of my poor dad. So I related to the kid in that, and it was like Alice discovering a wonderland, like I just went so deep into it. And even when I was at university, I'd spend my time reading more property books and going to property seminars and other things than I did studying. My grades probably suffered a bit, but I still ended up graduating with first class honours, thankfully, but that was through hard work as well.
After reading countless property books, Marn joined the market when he was a fresh university graduate.
I didn't have, the money at the time, so I ended up partnering with my parents. And how that came about is I wrote a little business plan to buy a property, renovate it and sell. And I was trying to get a partner to go in, a money partner to go in with me for it. So I took this little business plan around to the neighbours in my street that I knew quite well. And it was interesting because I had one of my next door neighbours put their hand up and say, "Yeah, Jarrad, I'll be your money partner." So my parents were then like, "Show me what is in this business plan, Jarrad. Like, what on earth have you put in here?" And then they read it, and they didn't realise how serious and keen I'd been on property all these years. And they're like, "Wow, you've actually given this a lot of thought, and it's something that you really want to do." And like enough of an idea to get started, but it was the burning desire and the motivation that kind of everyone was seeing in me. So they ended up agreeing to go partners with me, and we actually ended up doing quite a few subsequent deals together.
To find a property for Marn's first investment, it was a family effort.
What we ended up doing is we were obviously more driven by what we could afford, and my parents had never invested in property at all, so there was a big learning curve for them too. They had paid off their house by that stage but had no real desire to invest and hadn't gone into any of that space. So they put up the money and I dropped my brother off. So we organised our finance, obviously, and we had a pretty limited budget still because it was what they felt comfortable with. And we selected some suburbs in Perth more based on, what we could afford. And I would drop my brother off, who was 5 years younger than me, and on his bike. And his mandate was to drop some flyers in houses that looked really bad from the street and needed a renovation. And my flyer was really basic, on our inkjet printer that said, want to sell your property? I'll buy it fast, ready to go, call me for a quick answer. So it was really simple, and it was how we ended up buying our first 2 properties, actually. So it does work, and that was in a hot market. So one of the sellers called us, and they'd already left the house, and they were like, we've already moved interstate. What will you pay us for it? So with my parents, we worked out a bit of a budget for the renovation, and on this first one we came up with a 30,000 budget, and we worked backwards from that renovated selling price in the area, and we factored in a 15% profit. So being an engineer, I love my spreadsheets, and I did this in a pretty thought out way. So we came up with the amount to offer, which was 189,000, and I thought, I'll make it a bit of a not a round number, but a bit of an odd number so that they think we've really calculated it out. And it was accepted. So I was really blown away and not sure what to do next. And once the property was settled, we spent countless hours after work and on the weekends for around 4 months renovating this house. And it was like blood, sweat and tears into this thing. And I had my younger brother along with us. And it was, looking back on it, it was a really great time to spend as a family. Like myself and my younger brother learned so many great skills that have stuck with us, like with painting and landscaping and all the things. We worked out what we can do and what we don't want to do.
This first investment property was a massive effort, but it did show mine that committing to property full-time was possible.
It was bloody hard work and some of the best times. And we ended up spending 33,000, so we pretty tight on our budget, which was good. We did a lot to the property, so we completely gutted it, did like a new kitchen, new bathroom, painting, rendering to the front, and restored the roof, and did new carpets, blinds and landscaping. So it was a lot that we did, and it did take a lot of time. So our profit at the end of that one was 85,000 4 months later. So it was big money, like for me at the time, even splitting that 50-50. My first year salary as an engineer was 55,000. So I nearly made as much in the 4 months as I did in the whole year. We bought it for 189, yep. And the bank valued it, interestingly enough, I think for 220 or 230. We bought pretty well, and then the adding of value definitely helped. And so it was valued at 320 on completion of our renovation, and we rented it out for 380 per week. So it was decent profit and decent upside on the rental.
Marn used the equity from his first project to take on a second.
We used that then for our second little project, which was in another affordable area, Armidale, which is the lower socioeconomic, sort of one of the lowest price suburbs in Perth. So I used to be a bit, it's moved up a fair bit, but I used to be pretty worried going there and working on the weekends and stuff, because it was pretty rough, like shopping trolleys around everywhere, and you'd chat to the neighbours, and I was like, oh geez, like have I made a mistake in buying this one? So that second one we ended up selling, and we didn't make as much profit. I think we made 42,000 off the top of my head, but it was a shorter time period and we didn't do as much. So we employed a lot more trades and factored that into the costing, and it was still, nice to turn it over. And once learning a bit more about the area and the street, we kind of thought it doesn't make sense to keep this one and put up with the other headaches that might come from around that area.
At this point in time, Marn was fairly new to property investment. So, how did he know about equity and how to use it?
There was no podcasts. I would go into the Perth library, and they had a lot of investing books. So none of the other libraries around Perth had them, and I would try to find anywhere I could get a book. And it was a lot of the American authors that, had a lot of these concepts. So I was pretty, as I said, I was like Alice down, the rabbit hole into Wonderland, and any book I could find, I would just consume and get ideas from. And I'm probably not the most creative person myself, and I know that now. So in business and property, I love getting ideas from other people. And it takes me back to, my job as well as an engineer, where I went and got all the other ideas from everyone else. So that's kind of what I've done well.
Marn went on to continue investing in properties. However, However, after an unfortunate business situation, he had to sell his portfolio and start from scratch.
Kind of went on to then do some subdividing, and we retained and built the house. And that was a lot more lucrative. And potentially I should have just stuck with that one recipe, because what we did on one of our next projects, after doing, quite a few renos, I'm always looking to the next thing, and I wanted to try out a number of different scenarios. So we purchased this property in High Wycombe for $350,000, and we spent, I think, about $200 on the build at the rear. We renovated the front. I think our total outlay was about $650, and we made around $185,000 over the 12 to 14 months of doing that. So it was a much better gain, and we ended up with a new property that was on the rear and an older one on the front. And at that time, I ended up also selling that property, because I've always had a bit of an interplay between my properties and my business. And so starting out the business, I sold some properties to put some money in. And then I also had a moment where I bought my business partner out, or I actually sold all of my properties in 2015 to buy her out. So I was never expecting to have to do that. We had one disagreement, and it was our first disagreement, and she ended up wanting to leave the business. So it was a real shock at the time to have to come up with $1.5 million.
Having to come up with $1.5 million quickly was a shock for Marn. But this was not his first time being shocked when it comes to property.
I want to go back to one of these first ones, because I'm feeling the emotions come up already. So I was 24, and at the time I had 4 properties, and each of my properties were just being managed so bad. I was having issues with all of them, and it can really grind you down as an investor when you've got vacant properties and you've got tenants that are damaging things. And I had tenants move out owing lots of money and rent and badly damaging that property as well. So I was really second guessing whether this is all worth it at that time. And I had to continuously follow up with my property managers and find out what was happening. And they took ages to get back to me, and they were just useless. So I asked to see the tenancy application of that one that had skipped town and damaged the place. And upon looking at it, it's almost like the manager had never even screened it. Well, I could tell they should never have even been approved in the first place. And you want to have that trust, and you're paying for a service, and you don't want to have to manage your manager, as I like to say. But it was so frustrating. So I really didn't feel like I was getting the service I deserved, and they didn't care about my asset or my returns. So in the end, that was a big inspiration for me also in starting Investors Edge Real Estate. So what can come from a really dark period can be, a really positive inspiration too.
This story sparked the inspiration for Marn's business, but it is not finished yet.
We were told by the tenants that their son had died, and they had to move out suddenly, and they had lots of hospital bills, and I felt absolutely horrible with the whole situation. And I agreed to excuse them of what was owing, and the bond was released to them. And while I was around doing all the fix-ups begrudgingly on the house, and, they'd really left it in a horrible state. So I was around on the weekends trying to save money because I wouldn't get it back from them. And I was talking to the next door neighbour, who was the gossip queen of the street. And, she knew everything that was going on. So I told them about, how bad is it that the tenant's child's died? And she was like, oh, that's news to me. But yeah, that's really bad. And both couldn't believe it had happened. And we had that sort of moment. And then a few weeks later, I got a call from her telling me that the past tenants were actually back collecting some mail at the front mailbox, and their son was alive and well and running around the front yard. So, God, I really lost my faith in humanity as well for a while there. And, that made me question whether it's all worth it, and question, everything my property managers were doing to even have me place tenants in a property like that. So that was probably one of my worst times.
For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my Property Investor Update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, Make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. Just a reminder that the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature, as we don't know your specific situation. You should always seek professional advice before taking any action. I'll see you in the group.